Welcome to the first episode of a Students Declassified Market Supporting Guide. I am so excited for this segment, not only for what's to be broadcasted on it, but also the impact that it could have for anyone listening. Our first interviewee for this segment is Davianna Waluyn. She's currently a student at Georgia State University, majoring in human learning and development. If I hadn't majored in anthropology, I would be majoring in that. The extensive amount of knowledge she has comes from her extensive range of experiences. She's interned with Coke, Georgia Pacific, and the Metro Atlanta Chamber. She's also worked as a teacher for a church, a Panther Elite mentor, and even a poll worker for DeKalb County. There are so many words that I could say to describe her, but to keep the episode from being way too long, I'll stick with 3. She is tenacious, strategic, and I know this counts as 2 words, but she's the future, truly. I'm proud to know her and learn something from her every time we connect, and so I'm extremely honored that she'll be able to bring her knowledge to you all in the unique way that she always does. With that, let's get into the episode. Hi, Davianna. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm super excited for our episode. I'm super excited for what we're going to talk about. And I would love for you to just kick us off in talking about you. So a little bit more about yourself.
Yes. Okay. So I am Davianna. I currently go to Georgia State, but I love to say not for long because I'm graduating in December.
Okay.
So see everybody later or never. I am a human learning and development major, and I have 2 concentrations in behavioral and learning disabilities and learning technologies. Love it so far. It's a really great major. But before this, I was middle grades education, and I had a concentration in communication sciences and disorders because I wanted to be either a teacher or speech pathologist. But last summer, things change, and I like to describe it as a midlife crisis, but it's not a midlife crisis, but it was a crisis where I just was like, oh man, I don't think I'm going to make enough money. Like, if I'm being truly transparent, I was like, oh God, I'm not going to make enough to live. So then I, had a conversation with the previous intern and kind of switched the trajectory of everything I wanted to do. So no longer wanted to be a teacher, sad tears, or a speech pathologist, but I still love kids, really sad experience though. But I'm like, okay, what can I do where I can keep those same skills, like building relationships, being mentored, but also mentoring. And I was like, okay, learning and development, landed on it. I had the opportunity to try it. It was an experience, but now that kind of exposed me to the world of everything else there is to do in corporate, because I think when we think of corporate, we lump it up as like office jobs. And we're like, we want to go into corporate America. Yeah, I want to work in a cubicle. But what do you want to do while you're sitting in that cubicle? And there is so much stuff to do while you're sitting in the cubicle, which is what I got to learn. So now I'm just interested in a whole bunch of things. I was just telling you, like supply chain, I'm interested in that. I'm interested in customer experience. I'm interested in just doing general business support. Okay. Maybe even working with data a little bit, because I think I might like that, but probably on the side of data where I'm like talking to people about the data and breaking it down, because I don't want to just sit behind the computer, but I'd like a more clear-cut way of doing that. Yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Let's see, free time. Oh, I love outdoor recreation. I lead some outdoor recreation trips here. Like, I'm training to be a trip leader, so I don't lead like fully on my own yet, but hopefully in a couple years, or months, I'll be like fully leading on my own. Love doing community service. Do that pretty frequently here with Alpha Phi Omega. What else? Love cooking, reading. Oh, I love watching reality TV.
Okay. What's your favorite right now?
Girl, Love is Blind.
I should have known.
This season wasn't as good as the previous ones, but I watched it. Something to decompress. But yeah, I think that's like a little bit about me career-wise. Yeah. Yeah. Done a little research, worked in nonprofits, working corporate.
What haven't you done? You're really like Trish. Yeah. Austin and Ally.
Girl,
like career?
No, seriously, that's what my resume looks like Trish from Austin and Ally. I mean, it's great because I have so much different experience to pull from. Yeah. And I can always paint like a really colorful story of why I want to work at a particular company. Yeah. But girl, you look at that resume, student assistant, summer conferences, learning and development.
There's a story there.
Data entry? There's just a bunch of stuff on there, but hey.
There's a story there.
There is.
Yeah, and that gives a perfect segue for you to talk about So tell me about yourself, because there's literally so much that you can talk about.
I have the pitch down. Okay.
Oh.
Like I told you so much about myself all the time, different recruiters all the time. Oh, I got far from the mic. My bad. Sorry, guys. But yeah, it does definitely paint a really colorful story about why I want to work there and different like skills that you get to pull from. Like if I'm like something that's customer facing, right? We work conferences together. So I'm like, I realized I really loved, taking a negative experience for customers and making it something that's positive for them. We want you to come back and stay with us at conferences. So, really making their experience a positive one. Love teaching because I was a Panther Leap mentor. Like just so many different, skill sets to pull from. You just have to think about, well, what did I really do in this job? Like if, let's say I want an event plan or something, then I plan a practical competency. I'm going to talk about that, so there's just so much to pull from. And I think I like that about my resume,
You have a lot of well-rounded experience where you can go into a lot of different things because those things are transferable.
Yeah.
And that is something that I feel like is so needed, but also becoming a lot more normalized, I hope, in a lot of different companies of just, this stuff is transferable versus just focusing on a center, thinking that it's a better audience if it's like centered down. So I know it's something we were talking about a little bit earlier, but also something you just mentioned in terms of like all of your experiences. It's not linear. It's definitely not, but also you can't judge a book by its cover, especially when the cover is so diverse in experiences, but also if you don't know enough. So in getting into spaces when it's time to like apply for jobs and things like that, and they say, you gotta have this, you gotta have this, you gotta have this, or they limit to like certain majors, or they limit to da-da-da-da. But then somehow there's always the few that are, I actually didn't major in that, but I'm still here. Can you talk a little bit about that importance of kind of expanding that range of why things or why companies should kind of open those broadenings of, yes, these majors, but others will be considered, if that makes sense?
Yes. So let me tell you, I was not always as confident to apply to roles that I did not necessarily meet the skill set for, especially last summer, because my resume, it had experience on it, but nowhere near the point where it has it now. And I didn't have any, experience interning. Like I was just working for housing, but no interning experience. And I'm like, man, I feel I'm so underqualified for these roles. And not only did I not have interning experience, but I also didn't have the major that a lot of these roles were looking for.
Talk about it.
So it was just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, how do I feel like I'm a competitive applicant in a sea of people who are quote unquote truly competitive for these roles? And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I did get declined for like certain roles. And I'm like, okay, like I just wasn't meant to work there,
Yeah.
But I remember I was just scrolling on like Handshake one night and I saw this internship for this nonprofit Catalyst, and they work with other nonprofits. And I was like, okay, maybe this is my introduction into the world of just business, just doing something different. And I applied and I had to it was, I think in hindsight, a really good first internship because for the application, I got to write about what I was passionate about, right? And while I was no longer choosing to pursue education, that was still something that I was passionate about that I got to talk about in my application, like programs that I would create. And in the interview, they talked about like, why did you choose to do this program? This was not anything that I'd ever seen before. So it like gave me an opportunity to shine, which was really great, which I love, but it definitely takes time and confidence to feel like you're still an applicant and to still go for roles even if you don't get them, because there's still like value in not getting them, even interviewing, because I had applied for a role at a fintech company and a pretty well-known one at that. I didn't really want to work in fintech, but at the time I was like, I'll just take whatever I can get. And I interviewed like first and second round with him, I think. And I mean, I didn't get it, but I still had opportunity answering those questions and interviewing, because you can sit there and practice STAR all day in your mirror. But it's different to go and talk to recruiters and answer those questions and like gauge their responses to it. But now, like fast forward like 10 months, a year later, I'm obviously way more confident in applying to different roles, even if it says like preferred majors, because I know that I now have the skill set to back it up, and I have not only, regular just internship experience and working experience, but also extracurriculars. So there's a lot to tie into, because it's like outdoor recreation is so niche, and not just to say that I like doing those trips, but I took the initiative to want to lead those trips at school. So then people are like, well, tell me about that. Or like I taught group fitness classes, like you do that too. So it's just a lot to pull from. So now I'm more confident. So I say just like get out there, maybe apply for roles that you may not be the best fit for, but if they choose to interview you, you still get to practice your interviewing skills and also, you know, build your extracurriculars too and take just a bunch of different roles, but also don't be afraid to take roles at like smaller companies, which I saw you post on LinkedIn, but like that's really true because those still build your resume. And even though you may not be familiar with the company, like sometimes a lot of other places and people are familiar with the company.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question about like,
no, it did.
You know, how to do that. Yeah.
No, for real. And I remember your fitness era. So it's so funny that you brought that up.
Not no more because I started working with it. We'll get back on it.
But I completely agree. I think there's just so much talent out there now with so many different skill sets. So if it's not completely like finance and they're going for a finance role, I mean, give them a shot. Right. I don't think that there's not necessarily any type of contender that would keep them from not doing that. And like you were saying earlier, like I want to see more micro internships. I want to see more externships. I want to see more rotational ships, assistantships, all that stuff. I feel like those things are super rare or they're just super gate kept to where you don't see them until after the fact. Yeah. And in this way of corporate gatekeeping, I don't know how it's done or how that thing is put out, but it just always seems to miss people, you know, like those really good opportunities.
I think a really big thing that it misses us because neither of us are in business. And I feel like when they're having their career fairs and recruiting, like, yes, we have those all career fairs here, but that's like a quick snapshot of what their company does. When they're having these big sit downs with the big fours, those sit downs with the big fours are marketed to these schools of business. You know, they're not marketed to the College of Ed or the College of Social Sciences. You know, it's very kept with them so that they know about it. I don't know about it. And like, that was a big thing last summer because I didn't know anything about internships, rotational programs. I was set to graduate, I think, earlier this year, but I'm like, I need to say that I'm a junior on a lot of these internships.
Talk about it. Just talk about how much it matters.
I'm like, oh man, junior, sophomore, junior,
have to be between
junior.
Year this and this. I'm like, this and
well,
this.
clearly I'm not gonna have child if I'm graduating in May. So I was like, graduating as a junior. I even like picked up management as a minor for a little bit. I took one class. I did not like it. I felt like it was just a really large class and I wasn't learning much because it was just such a big class, like 200 people. I'm like, I just stick with my major and learn. But yeah, a lot of them like really specific years, and they have like really great like early college programs like Google's Bold, for example. Like they're not the only group that like caters to sophomores and freshmen, but lots of companies have that. But at the time, I obviously wasn't pursuing this, so I didn't know. And you really, you know, you have to be in the year that the companies want because they want to hire you right when you graduate. So I'm like, okay, I'm a junior now, and then now I'm graduating now.
Yeah, that's such a real experience. I mean, I understand like their recruiting efforts and understanding why you may need to recruit for that certain time, whether it's like fiscal year budget or strategy implementation of how many people you want to take on and things like that, of expansions and corporate expansions. But it can be a little bit difficult, of course, on the other side. You know, those people who are planning this stuff out and writing the job descriptions, you already got a job. And I know you were talking about earlier of just things that you're interested in and all these things that you want to do. And being in corporate is such a unique space, especially right now as people who don't have a job. You know what I mean? As people who are in corporate, but you're in corporate for a specific amount of time. And after that, a lot of time is up. You're up to the next. Or while you're working at this other place, you're already looking for the next thing. So you can keep that stability that you have. Right. Because not everybody, you know, has the gracious luxury to, oh, well, maybe I could take a semester off without having to worry about what you were talking about of just finances and bills or things or, you know, whatever. And how can you advance yourself, or even people who are looking to advance themselves out of college, saving for that so they can figure out what their next apartment is. Do they need to do this? All that stuff. And it kind of begs the question for me that there's a lot of development that needs to be done in these spaces, not just internship spaces, but in general for corporations. And I know you were talking about your interest in L&D, for those of you who don't know, which is learning and development. And then also earlier we talked about the STAR method, which you guys don't know. It's like a behavioral interviewing method that you should follow. Feel free to look it up, but I'll also put it in the show notes after we finish. Learning and development. Can you talk a little bit more about like what are the ways that you feel like corporations need that? Why do they need L&D so much? Because I know you understand, and I know I understand why L&D is super important to corporations, but maybe from fresh perspectives of us talking about it and for the audience.
So like a lot of learning and development teams are split a couple of different ways. And this is just what I learned from like research, right? And just being at a company and doing L&D. Like there's L&D in sales, but then there are certain companies where L&D is like grouped with HR. But I think one of the largest reasons I would say, well, I think we need L&D is like when I was telling you, lots of skills can be taught. L&D has the opportunity to teach those skills, especially sales, for example, because that's what I worked in, right? You may not know about this product, but you can watch this course that's created by a L&D professional to tell you about this product, and now you can go sell it, right? So it's a great way to educate people on a company, but also when you look at learning and development in terms of early career programs and bringing in new talent, it's a great way to be an awesome introduction to a company for someone, you know, especially coming straight out of school or looking for where you want to go post-grad. To have a wonderful early career program will attract not only the talent that you have, but attract more talent, because they're going to go just word of mouth alone and tell their friends about how great your early career program was. And now they want to come back. So I think those are like really two big benefits of L&D, so to speak, like training your new professionals and then attracting that early career talent. But obviously there's like L&D and DEI as well, and teaching people like how to interact. You get that forward facilitation sometimes. You even like with Panther Leap Mentor, I got to interact with so many different people, even my age, but in a different context, and bring them into housing. And then you get that internal fulfillment because now I see you in a role and I'm like, you got it, you know, and I played a role in that. So, and I love my mentees, by the way. I don't know if they're going to listen to this, but if y'all do, love y'all. But yeah, I think those are really big things, key things for L&D. But what really attracted me to L&D is because, like I said, I wanted to find something that still kept those skills that I really liked from teaching. Like I didn't want to feel like I was so far detached from teaching, because that was still something that to my core I loved to do. So it was something close to it in the corporate world that would allow me to do it. Yeah.
Totally understand. I feel like you and I are in the same boat with a lot of the things that we value, but also a lot of the things that we want to do, even though they're on completely different spheres. And it's all front facing, and like you were talking about, of just the contribution of impact and the contribution of being able to do that and being able to have that front facing impact like you were talking about is within L&D, and it is within like that employee engagement work and that corporate experience work that you were talking about. And to forward your point of, it's not just within HR, it's not just within D&I, it's within sales, it could be within marketing, it could be within all these things. And I think that's so unique about L&D. It's like, it doesn't have to be this enigma of being pushed together with everything else. And like, you know, like mushed together like those aluminum foil balls, you know, where you have to put like layers on things. You can't tell which layer is which because it's all aluminum foil. And I feel like sometimes that's how L&D can get wrapped. You know what I mean? At least from experience and research and what you were saying of just like, it's all kind of like melded together, but there's never really like set structures.
And I think sometimes there's also not an overall good company perception of what L&D professionals do outside of the people that do L&D, because like I was saying, people think like L&D, you're just clicking through those HR modules. That's not all they do. Like some companies have really comprehensive L&D teams. Like when companies have certain like principles that they work by, right? Or things that they want to implement within company culture, there's an L&D team putting that together to figure out how to push that to everyone in the company of how can we adapt to these specific principles. So L&D is just, it is genuinely so broad, which is great. And you can really go anywhere in the company. Like even if you're bringing on a new program, right? Like let's say, this basic simple, everyone's using Microsoft and we want to switch to Google. How can everyone use G Suite? You know, that like an L&D professional can put that together and go through and learn how G Suite is used and how to present that to the company so that people don't have issues transitioning from Microsoft to G Suite.
Exactly.
So it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. And it's a lot more meticulous than like you were saying.
Yes. That is what I learned. Oh my goodness.
It's a lot of work.
Yes, like it is. I don't be naive like me and think you're just getting up and speaking in front of people, because yes, that is a part of it. But who's making the content that you're speaking about? You. Like I had to think about that. I was like, man, I didn't think people actually had to make this.
Who's making, on top of who's making the content, who's researching the content?
Exactly.
Who's doing the focus groups for the content? Like, it's me.
While L&D is like a broad like scope of work, the L&D teams are the L&D teams. You know, sometimes they are a part of HR, but like they are the people doing the learning and development for that company. Exactly. So you want this program created, you're doing the research behind it, you're doing your script creation, you're talking to whoever you want to maybe come speak with this program, you're thinking about the aesthetics of how you want to present it. Do we want this to be like a YouTube video? Do we want you to come in person and learn it? So you're putting all of that stuff together, which it's a challenge. It's a rewarding one at the end of it. But when you're going through it, it's a challenge.
No, totally. And I know one of the challenges that you talked about earlier was like early career. And both of us were early career. Yeah. And where we've been through internships, we've had multiple experiences. So we've got a couple things under our belt of experience-wise. But talking about like the internship experience, regardless of the actual work that we're doing. Yeah. I want to hear your thoughts on like what could L&D look like for just internship experiences with what you've gone through? What are some things that you've noticed? What do you think are some things that you would change? What are some things that are like, oh my gosh, please keep this? Like, what do you think overall?
So I think I had like a really specific early career program within the company that I was at, because we have our general interns, but then there was a very specific intern program. And I think for the intern program that I went to, it was pretty well fleshed out in terms of we had like networking lunches where like lunch and learns where we got to speak with execs from the team that we were part of, which is like was the sales team. So different people from the sales team would come in and speak to us. Marketing research would come in and speak with us, right? We had a panel with the previous interns that were there, rotationals that were currently hired, like they came in and got to speak with us. So I think in that like aspect, it was a really great program. And our career, the lady who was over the program, I think she did her best to try to match us with programs that we said we were interested in our interviews, because you know, everyone submits their requests for proposals, and I think she really did her best to make sure it was great in that aspect. Also, we took trips, like I worked in paper, and we got to tour the paper mills that they were at.
So you're like Dunder Mifflin.
Yeah, it's really like real life Dunder Mifflin. I don't know too much about the office, but I know it's a paper company.
Look, you know that. That's the
I know that, but that's about it. And because it was sales, like we got to shadow field sales consultants, and I got to go to New York and, you know, see what it was like to sell our products in the industrial space. So I think in that regard, it was a really great early career program. One thing I would really like to see, though, and this is like different from learning and development, and I kind of spoke on this a little bit, but I would love to see like just stronger recruiting efforts from mid-tier academic institutions. And I say mid-tier in terms of, you know, you're not a top 10 or a top 20. Like, we're great in undergraduate research. I think we're like number 1 for U.S. News and Report, but or like 2. We're
you're up there,
you know. But and it's not like when you think of like top schools, you know, that's not what you see. But I feel like there's still talent at top schools, like great, amazing talent. There's me, there's you, there's all the other people that you've had the pleasure of hosting on your podcast that are great talent. And I feel like the recruiting effort's just not there for, or maybe it is, but like
there should be new methods for attracting talent.
Yes, because like they have the career fairs. I'm like, I see that you're here, but when I see your intern group, I don't see that it's reflected that you were here or that you were there. You know, I see that you went to both Georgia State and you went to both KSU, and that you went to UGA and you went to Georgia Tech. And it's not always going to be proportionate in terms of who is in your program, right? Because maybe you just didn't like the candidate. But I don't feel like I should be seeing 10 UGAs, 10 Georgia Techs, 1 Georgia State, 1 Kennesaw State, and then 1 person from a technical college. Like, where is that diversity? And not only in that, but also in terms of that diversity of thought and major, because that is important. Like, yes, everyone can be business majors, but what good is it if everyone thinks the same, right?
Exactly.
And everyone can sit here and say, oh yeah, I think that's what you should do. I think that's what you all have business brains, you know? And it's great to have more thought, a philosophy brain, an anthropology brain, an education brain, even a biology brain, literally, you know, because everyone is still going to have ideas that can come from a different angle based off of their life experiences and the education that they have, right? Especially if you already are so familiar with the concept, sometimes you don't have any idea of how to break that down to people. Like, I was sitting in another meeting with my current boss, and they're working on this project, and, you know, that's a skill that they're talking about is you can know a concept at the highest level, you know, your professor level, but you can't break it down to kindergarten level.
Exactly.
Right?
Then there's some issue.
There are people there that will really allow you to kind of think about that. So I think that's something that I really would like to see. Is just, I think, stronger recruitment efforts. Not to say that they maybe don't do it, or maybe there's some type of disconnect. Maybe people are not as familiar with your company at the particular school that you're recruiting at, but host a, I don't know, drink mixer of mocktails and have that so that people
like
can
that open
get familiar.
dialogue.
Exactly. So that people can get familiar with your company, because I'm like, where are you? Everybody, like, this just shouldn't be so homogeneous. You know? And that's like my big thing for early career programs. Like, definitely diversity of major in there, diversity of schools.
I love diversity of thought. I love diversity of opinion. And I think now, I don't know if this is going to be as relevant to other people who are like millennials and, you know, people who are in past internship experiences. But for the people that I know right now, or at least for the generation that I know right now, something's got to give. You know what I mean? Of just, there's so many different ways that we can be engaged and also be like retained. Right. And I think because one, just coming from the pandemic and that being like a catalyst for a lot of the initiatives and a lot of things that we see now, thinking about recruitment in early talent and early career, you got to put yourself out there. Like, not just recruiting, but it's even having to have some type of recruiting changes for bigger names, because we're starting to recognize what's important to us, because we're early career. We're figuring out what we want to do, what we like and what we don't like. But also in thinking about what their experiences will be like into the actual internship program itself, and then how they choose to communicate when it's over. And that's something to think about. Like, so on top of the recruiting efforts, just during the program, and like that investment of learning and that investment of consistency and that investment of resources and knowledge, and just how that is shared but also expanded upon, is also something important. And I think that's one thing for at least a lot of people is interns are only there for maybe like 3-6 months, unless it's like rotational ships, and those are between like 1 and 3 years, which is completely different. But they only have so much time to get to know you and to get a company, and the impression that is left on them, that is going to be translated out to others. So that is something else that I also will never forget.
Like, one of my previous bosses, she would always say, you know, this is your time. We want to see if we like you. We also want you to like us. And the whole time I always was like, girl, I don't care if I don't like y'all or not. Like, y'all give me a job, I'm coming back. It doesn't matter. I always thought she was just joking, but that really is true. Like, internships really are your time to date a company too. Because if you are not a fan of the culture, if you're not a fan of the people, you're not going to want to come back. But they also have to be a fan of you too. So like, they can love you, but if you don't love them, like 9 times out of 10, you're not coming back. So I think like that's a really great way to look at internships, because I think sometimes we just want it so much that they could
have
like
everything else.
Yeah, they could have a horrible early career program. They could have horrible talent retention. They could have everything could be bad, but
hey, I got a job.
I'm here, right? And if you want me back, I'll be here again. So I think like that's something that we can also sometimes miss, especially when we want our career so bad and we're like coming from a different field, especially for me, because I'm like, I may not have the shot to work in this type of corporation ever again, you know? So whether I like you or not, I'm saying the entire internship, you know?
It's that level of accountability on both sides.
Right.
I can be the first to say, you know, I used to be the same way, where I would try and grab at every job that I had when I didn't have experience, because I was like, I didn't know how to sell myself, nonetheless, of like relying on my coursework and relying on, if I knew all that back then, you would have seen a lot of my courses on my resume, like people's are now, or like, you know, projects and community service and all that stuff of things I used to do. I didn't know how to do that. And there's so many helpful resources and so many different talents that I've seen on LinkedIn now, or that I saw beforehand, that I'm like, oh, if I knew what you knew, like there are 2 women that I follow on LinkedIn. One is Morgan Young. She is a early career content creator on LinkedIn, and like a LinkedIn influencer, get it? Influencer. But she has been phenomenal in the work that she does surrounding like engineering and particularly in the tech space. So think like software engineering, and product management, stuff like that. Of the roles, but also the transparency and the honesty and the community that she's built of people that follow her, because of all the resources, all the knowledge, and all of the advice and situations that she's very candid about. And she's been, she's on her 6th internship with Disney.
Oh, great.
I know, that's insane. Like,
girl.
I know, right? Like, just seeing the amount of intention put into her work, it's so easy for me to understand why she has a community. It's so easy for me to understand why she has the opportunities that she has. And it's so easy for me to understand why people would want to collaborate with her and why people would want to understandably be around her and have that on their feed and their network. Because beforehand, you couldn't find that, or you'd have to research that. You have to re-up that. And there's another woman, her name is Jade Walters.
I do follow her.
She's awesome. I don't even gotta tell you.
I always am like liking and reposting her stuff when she's looking for, when she, you know, does like the wrap-ups of who's looking for interns and who's looking for rotationals. And one of my friends texts me, says, Davianna, you are such a lifesaver because I'm applying so many of the things you're reposting. And I'm like, that's because this girl is doing the work. And it's so great because sometimes it can be so difficult to find, you know, rotational programs, because sometimes you don't know where to look, you know,
especially for like startups and stuff too. Those things are not going to be advertised.
Like, do I look on Handshake? Do I look on LinkedIn? Like, do I look on, you know, Indeed? Do I look on your website? But if I have to look on your website, then I have to know that you as a company exist, you know.
And how do I know you exist?
I probably don't know that you exist, especially if you're like a startup, you know. So those, she's saving the world one intern at a time. Shout out to you, Jade.
One intern at a time, one candidate at a time, whatever you want to call it. And that kind of brings me to my next point, talking about your confidence. That was something that you've mentioned, and I can sense it over here. The confident energy. You're like, oh, I mean business. Period. Like, I don't.
Oh my God.
You know, it's, I'm established. It's been established that I'm established. Like, you know, like doubling up on that. And I want to kind of inquire a little bit more about your brain in that space of how have you begun to be so confident? I know we talked earlier about how it can be essentially like in being transparent and honest about how soul crushing literally can be to, you know, apply for these things. And I know you and I were talking about this off the air of, we were talking about something that we applied to and we both immediately were rejected. And it's like, you know, it sucks, but
it's like a part of the confidence of, I think, and I want to preface with, I have obviously not always had the confidence in the business space that I do, but just trying to go into interviews and presenting as yourself, right? Like, I go in and I am like a shrunk, not necessarily a shrunker personality, but I'm smiling, I'm bubbly. Like, I can tell you about myself. I can engage in a little bit of conversation about what I really love to do outside of work, because I'm not passionate about corporate America, you know, but companies love to hear about what you are passionate about in your free time, and being able to talk about that and shine through, I think is really important in interviews. So that's something that definitely boosts my confidence, to know that I can talk about my passions and know how I can sell them as well. Because, you know, you think about your answers to these questions before you answer them. Like, I'm in the mirror practice and like, oh, how would I theoretically answer this? Right? So that helps build your confidence. But even before I was in this space, you know, I was in education and speech pathology, and I had a plan with that, right? Like, I knew what I was doing. I knew where I was going to work. I knew where I was going to grad school, and that type of stuff kind of builds your confidence too, especially when you're talking to professors and telling you know, you'd be great for this or you'd be great for that. Like, that builds your confidence to know, like, I am a good fit for these roles. But if I don't get something, it's just, at this point, I just didn't get it. You didn't want me. That's okay. I don't have to work for you, because there's probably another company that will want me, right? And if you are like willing to deny me, and obviously I don't know if they denied us based on our major alone, but I firmly, like, am 97% sure like their AI bot just like kicked us because we didn't have the preferred major that they wanted. But it's like, if you're willing to deny me based off major alone, and you don't want to interview me or even see what type of person I am, is this the type of company that I want to work for? Yeah,
you didn't need me anyway.
Right, you didn't need me anyways, and I kind of need you guys, but I'll tell myself I don't need you anyway. So
it's so real.
I hope like that answers your question about, you know, creating that level of business confidence, so to speak, but just knowing that you know how to sell your skill sets. Like, you've practiced. There are certain questions that I know land great with interviewers, because I've used the response so many times, and sometimes it's a different answer for another question, but it's the same situation, and you can gauge, you know, oh wow, like, that's so great that you did that, you know, really went above and beyond. I'm like, yeah, I'm using that again and again and again, so I can't use it anymore. And it really lands. So I guess just practicing really helps build the confidence, and just going and speaking to different people and watching how they respond. That does it for me.
And I want to know, like, what are some of the most common questions that you think that you've gotten over your course of interviewing? Yeah, go ahead.
My little fancy note. Okay.
Because
So outside of tell me about yourself, I feel like you will get a lot of questions about how you worked with like problematic team members and how you like tell me about a time where a situation didn't go as planned and how did you adjust to that. That is a question in like different fonts that I feel like you get a lot. And I always like tell them about a group project that I was working on, or a question where it's like tell me about a time where you had a project and you didn't really know how to approach it. How did you go about doing it? That's something I feel like you get a lot.
Tell me about the time you were leading a team.
Yeah, you get questions like that. Or tell me about a time where you had to, show empathy or something like that. You get those questions quite frequently.
It's like Simon Says.
Yeah.
That's immediately what my brain just went to when we're just saying, tell me about a time, tell me about a time, tell me. Simon Says.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So these are questions from my current internship. This one was like a different type of internship because I didn't get too many behavioral like interview questions for that one. Let's see. I have something written down. Let's see here. Oh, I feel like I haven't gotten this question as often, but like when you have to choose between like priorities and how did you manage that, or how do you rank priorities?
That's a good question.
Like that's something that I feel like I get every once in a while, but I feel like that is outside of tell me about yourself. I feel like I always get some variation of a time where you had to go above and beyond, right? So I think if you work in customer service or if you've done anything with just working with people, that is something that I get a lot. And how do you adjust to, changes? How do you work with team members who don't necessarily perform as well, or like a biggest weakness? Like I get that one. And
yeah, what is your biggest strength? What is your biggest weakness?
Yeah,
Why do you think
and obviously no one's going to be out here like, yeah, I just think I'm so bad at this because, why would I want you to say that?
What do you want me to say?
Right, but that, let's see, this one, which I was not expecting her to ask me this, but she got most impactful experience in one of my most recent interviews. And I was like, that is a really good one, girl. Yeah. And I came up with a good answer, but I was like, man, I had to think about that one for a bit.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the goal. And I want to ask, what are some questions that you ask back to the companies?
Something that I love to ask is about their work-life balance. And I think obviously everyone likes to talk about work-life balance, but I don't want to just ask a question for the sake of asking questions, right? Yeah. So I want to ask you something that I feel like is going to be useful to me. So I usually don't be like, yeah, so what's the work-life balance like here? Like, so if it's an executive, I might ask, how is that transition when you were like a mid-level executive to a senior level executive? How did your work-life balance change? How do you feel like you were able to manage that and your family? Do you feel like the company culture supports you going and being a mom or pursuing just whatever extracurricular activities you want to do outside of work, right?
Exactly.
That is something that I really like to ask. If someone has created a program or worked on the program, I ask them I just recently asked this, like, what was the business need that you saw for the creation of this program?
Exactly.
Right? Because especially if it's a long-standing program, clearly it's great, but like, what did you see?
What were your thoughts
that
behind
was
this?
missing? Right?
Yeah.
To make this. If they work directly with early career talent, like, what's your favorite part about developing early career talent? What do you see that you just really love doing that makes you stick with this role? And also, I think asking about company culture is a really good one.
Yeah.
Most people will say like, oh yeah, I love my job, it's so great here, but sometimes you might get people who are
other stuff,
really honest about the company culture. Like maybe it's a little more cutthroat, and they might tell you that. So
I love transparency. That's so valued. And I think right when you were talking about the question about the how did you come to the creation of this project or this program, what is your development around this, my instant thought, especially when you were talking about early career talent and what do you like about developing it, my immediate question was, how do you view development for early career talent? How do you view advancement for XYZ? And that can go to anybody. So like when you're talking about the executive, how do you view advancement within your role? How do you view progression within your role? How do you find the metrics for success within your role of what you do?
Yes,
like that's something important.
Yes.
That's what I need to know at least. And I know one question that I usually like to ask to people when I'm getting to know them is, how have they grown? I think you can always talk about what you've learned, and that's a lot easier. But to me, at least in my experience of hearing that question, but also having to answer that question, there are a lot of different ways that it can be interpreted. So I always like to ask a specific one that opens up the conversation, which is, how have you grown? Tell me in what ways have you grown, whether it's in your role, how have you grown specifically at this company? How have you grown personally, professionally, mentally? How do you think? And that question always gets them to open up beyond just the corporate sphere. And I love that, because I don't want to keep you attached to a pedestal of corporate, because I understand you may not learn everything corporate in corporate. You know what I mean? Like, some people learn from LinkedIn Learning. Some people learn from YouTube videos. Some people learn from working at a restaurant, and they adapted the skill of being really good at numbers, and that's how they became an accountant. And it just all kind of transcends. And I love to give people the floor to open it. And I think some of the best conversations, or not even some of the best, almost all of the best conversations that I've had, whether it's with professionals or with executives or things like that, have always come from it just being a conversation, and everything just flows like that.
Right.
And that's like one of the mottos of the podcast, is connecting through conversation. It's so easy to just talk. It's so easy to just communicate. You know what I mean? When there's a lot of that, the layers being pulled back, you know,
Right.
We're here because we just want to have a conversation.
Right.
Take that as it is. And then there's so many things that come from that. And you learn so much when you just hear someone just talking.
Right.
So many of my like best think points come from someone saying something, and I'm like, light bulb for me.
Right.
And they're like, what? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just thought about this thing because you just said this, or da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Or so many ideas come from, oh man, I wish I just had this. And it's like, I could do that.
Right.
What you talking about? Or things like that. I think there's just so much power in just communication and conversing and just talking. And like you were talking about earlier with the questions that tell me about a time and da-da-da-da-da, those extremely structured questions I get, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, because sometimes it just puts me in a box or a category, you know what I mean, where I want to be able to expand within that. So I see the pros of those types of questions, but I also see the cons.
I know it's like the pro is that it's so quick for interviewers to be able to easily follow like what you did in a scenario and how you played a role. But I also think like we do stick to STAR as a very structured format. But over time, like I don't typically, because lots of interviews ask the same questions in different fonts, and I don't typically switch up the experiences that I'm using. So over time, I've gotten better at not being so robotic in, yes, I'm addressing the S, I'm addressing the T, I'm addressing the A, I'm addressing the R, but being able to kind of tell the story of what I did in that role. And like if they're from Atlanta, you know, in relation to like I went out of my way to walk over from this place to this place, right? I painted, that was not my role either. So I paint the leadership hierarchy of who did what. Like I clearly didn't, you know, went above and beyond and did way more than my job. So I always paint that. So just getting over time, you just get more comfortable, I think, with telling experiences. Like there's no need to like switch it up because your resume is the same everywhere, you know? So
the same.
Pull from those same experiences, just take them and sharpen them. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just use what you have and the experiences that you have. But while I was thinking, a question that I do get asked a lot definitely came up. And it's like, what made you choose your major and what attracts you to this role, right?
Yeah.
And other people probably get asked this too, but I think for me, it's always a great question that interviewers want to ask me because my major is not something that you see often, right?
Yep.
And when you do see it, people don't really know what human learning and development is here because some people will think L&D, some people will think organizational psychology, some people will think I am in psychology.
I thought like early career education, like early childhood education.
No one
like
knows
babies.
what human learning and development is.
Yeah.
So, also getting able to quickly shorthand what my major is and the types of classes that I take. Because I usually just like, I like to describe it as education for people that don't want to be teachers. And I get a lot of flexibility and freedom.
That's so unique.
And that was also a line that was workshopped in an interview. And I saw someone respond to it and they seemed like they loved it. So I kept it.
Yeah. Me with anthropology. Cute. What's that? And I'm like, okay, we're gonna go through.
You have your one-liner for what your major is because you want them to know like why you're attracted to it. So you get to say like, yeah, I get assigned these projects, but I get to take my own spin on them. Like I had one thing where I needed to create like a resource page, and I did it for employees, or I had to create an assignment. And you know that? Do you remember from when you went through Panther Leap and y'all did the city activity, like in my city, and you're like separated in towns and you're given like a different amount of resources and you have to like build your city up. Like I adapted that for an HR activity for one of my classes to do like to show like inequalities, but I used like the Big Four to do it. And connecting those skill sets back to what I saw in that role that I like. So definitely review the role, take like 3 key points from the role, and then you get to wrap it all around. Like I chose anthropology because I like, you know, studying humans or whatever. And then I got into HR and realized HR is just working with humans, and then this role attracted me to this. So just making it all connected. I think that's another question I get a lot.
And I love seeing the feedback loop literally in your head. Wait, what was I talking about? And then just seeing how literally you were connecting points, and then you had to just, like, the follow through is my whole point of like, oh, what was I talking about this again? Yeah, I was talking about this. And by the time you're thinking that in your head of what was I talking about again?
Follow through is also important in interviews too. I was in another interview recently, and I don't think I was talking too fast. Like the lady even stopped to tell me like my cadence was perfect, but she was typing, so she didn't really, you know, like she was trying to type while I was trying to talk. And I was like, okay, so quickly adapted in an interview. Every answer that I did at the end, I'm like, so in short, I would do this, this, and this. Yeah. That way,
you're shortening it for her
to write down. Like you're gonna go talk to your hiring team after this, but at least you can say like, this is what she recently answered for me. Yeah. So yeah,
that's amazing. I mean, just the cognitive relevance of that, of just how much you can innovate yourself and essentially invent yourself to an interview within the limited amount of time that you have, but then also for your resume. It's like you are sharing a story about you, but it's almost like sometimes in a way you're sharing a story about you that is specifically fit for who you're going to be in the future. Yeah. You're doing all this so you can get where you need to go in the future, which makes sense. But it's almost like you're reinventing the future you. So when you're having to do this work inside yourself, you're already like going towards it. And that's why it's so important to put in the work for it.
It's like so much work. I think like me and you are very similar in that aspect. Like we're always doing now, but we're also thinking about future. It's like, what is future be going to be like? But boy, would it just be so nice to sometimes just live in the moment, you know? Not saying I don't, but like there are some days I'm like, man, what am I going to want 10 years from now? And am I like helping myself get there right now? You know what I'm saying? But there's also, I think, like this really big knowledge gap in early careers when you're number one, not in it. And then if you are in it, but you don't have the resources, you still have that knowledge gap because
there's always that disconnect.
It's always that disconnect.
Always there.
Like, and I mean, I know I'm like from a unique perspective because I wasn't always wanting to pursue corporate, I mean, I've done really well developing my resume within the last year, but there are people who have known that they've always wanted to pursue corporate and knew as soon as they got to school that they needed to start applying for internships. You know,
I didn't know that. I didn't start applying until senior year.
See, there are people that were looking for internships before they even left high school, you know, looking at early career accelerated programs before they even left. People who's, you know, their teams from these big companies were coming to speak to these high schools about coming and doing our program. So there's just this big disconnect, even with how to interview. There is this disconnect. And I mean, I'm grateful to Panther Leap for introducing me to STAR because that's really the first workshop, but it's just a really basic level workshop that you get about how to do it. You know, you have to kind of workshop and craft those answers on your own, but at least I got to learn it from somewhere because like interviewing is a skill. You know, being able to answer questions, being able to connect with whoever is on the other side of that screen for you. That's you know, a skill. Being able to smile, not that awkward connection and tension in an interview, like that is really important.
And presenting yourself. Exactly. That's a skill in itself. That's all something that's never going to go away.
Skills, but they're all like, well, how do I learn them if no one around me is doing it, right? And even like I have family hard professionals, but like they're in social work, so they may not work directly in corporate. Or, you know, my auntie, she's like a consultant but she works for herself, you know? So there's all these things and all this knowledge that you feel like you have to have. Sometimes you have no idea where you're getting it from. You know?
And then simple statements like, oh, just be yourself. Look, I understand the intention of that statement, but if that's all that's going to be said there, there's still going to create a disconnect for me in that way because you're not telling me of in what ways of my strengths and my weaknesses should be applied for this interview or should be applied for this resume, because that leaves more error or more effort that needs to that should have been there. You know what I mean?
And I think that like the tell me about yourself question is like a prime example of there being a disconnect, because
Like,
they
okay.
don't want to know like what you like to do for fun, what type of music you like to listen to in your free time. You know, you can put that at the end, but you need to start off where you go to school, like what's your major, maybe what attracted you to that. If you switched locations, that's what they want to know, right? Why you are interested in the role. I remember someone was saying the first time they answered that question, they did it so wrong. They talked about their horoscope sign. That's not what they want to know. But like to someone who doesn't have the knowledge about how to interact in these spaces and how to interview, well, what else would you think tell me about yourself means, right? And that gives you so much anxiety, because like, well, what do you mean? What do you want to know about me? What do you want me to tell you?
Exactly.
And
it's like you have to have a certain type of acumen for these things. And it's like...
Speak on it. Speak on it. Oh my gosh.
It's just like there's not enough put into it in that way. And I know that there was people who are saying that, you know, there's resources floating everywhere. That is nice. When are those resources going to be like put somewhere centrally? You know what I mean? And it's just... there's so much that can be improved, and like being in like that brain or that mindset all the time of improvements, adjustments, collaboration, communication. It can be a lot, and that leads to so many things that could be improved on. And then on top of improving ourselves, and that's just because we're young in the career talent. You know, we have so many places and faces that can be moved, and there's just so much fluidity in work in that. Right. It's like, how do you relax? How do you calm down like of these things? Because I know my brain is always on go, and I know if my brain is on go, I know your brain is on go. So how do you decompress? You know, okay, so last summer I bought a Kindle, right? Because I was like, I'm gonna start reading. Like, I need to be a reader. So I bought me a little Kindle Paperwhite, and I was a reader for a while. She's in my purse right now. I've been slowed down on the reading front, but I think reading is a really great way that I like to relax, because you can say watching TV is relaxing, and it is, but watching TV is a little bit more passive than reading is, because you're actively reading whatever book you're consuming. So it's kind of hard to focus on the words that I'm reading, follow the plot line, while also thinking about everything that I need to do, right? And sometimes just taking a break is just really important, which is why I think like the outdoor recreation stuff is great, because at least for the 8 hours that I'm on this trip, I'm in this cave, like I'm not wondering about work or worrying about school. So that is like a really great way for me to relax. And I think because I've also been in school for so long, I don't focus on school as a stressor as much, because even when I have a bunch of assignments, like I know that I'm going to do them, and I know how I'm going to tackle it. It's never like a big stressor point for me. So I think eliminating school as that option, but also it's still a being on go all the time. Like you were telling me about the experience that you were having. I'm like, well, that's how you answer that. Tell me about yourself question, or that's how you answer that star question when it's given to you. But it's like, do I want to be in that mode all the time? No. But I mean, oh well, like I'm an early career person who feels like I have something to prove, and not necessarily something to prove in the way of like everyone thought I wasn't going to be successful, but like something to prove to myself. Like I'd switch out of my entire career path, like left the dreams I had since I wanted to be a kid. Like I need to like land in this field and be something. So yeah, it's a little pressure, it's a little stress, but pressure make diamonds, you know what I'm saying? So gotta have it. But I understand.
I guess like reading is just really great. Decompressor, love going outside. Hanging out with my friends is really great. And sometimes I think, like I forget I know so many people and have people that are like willing to talk to me. Like even this conversation right now is just such a great like decompressor, even though we're talking about work stuff and like
it's in a different atmosphere.
It's more relaxed, you know what I'm saying? I'm talking to somebody who can relate, who knows what I'm going through. That's just like a really great way. There's so many just ways to decompress, but just making sure you take a break. Like I'm not in PD mode all the time, professional development. If you don't know what PD means, I'm not in that mode all the time. You know, I'm at work, I'm enjoying work, I'm putting in the hours, but I want to come home and not be in work mode, you know?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that of, you know, even though we're talking about work right now, it's in a different space. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm saying of like these conversations that could be revolutionary to some corporations in their work. It's like, that is something, if it's just in a different setting, that it could be approached a lot more smoothly. Yeah. And I know you have probably tons of ideas for like initiatives and strategics and projects for L&D and what you want to go into and just being able to help others. And I want to know on the flip side, how can others help you? So like how can professionals tune in and tap into your potential of what you've got going on, be able to assist you and support you?
Yeah, so I feel like we kind of touched on them briefly throughout different moments of the podcast, but like first thing I would really want to say is being open to who applies to your roles, right? And being open in terms of major. I know sometimes we're a little bit stricter in terms of what year, because maybe you want to give them an offer, you know, a couple of years out or a year out and not right now, but being open to that, because there is that diversity of thought. And I think sometimes it gets ruined when there's like an actual AI pulling their stuff versus an actual person looking at it, because a person gets to really try to evaluate the experiences and the cover letter. But if it's an AI, like it just pulls it. So maybe let's not use those anymore. Start there. But I think just being open and looking at the experience and what makes someone a well-rounded candidate versus just if they have the major that you're looking for, I think that's something that I would love to see companies do more often, because while I've had great experiences at certain companies with my major, I feel like just like what we were talking about with the company that pulled like both of our applications like right off the bat, I think, you know, we could be a little bit more open in that aspect, because they still have something that they can contribute to your team. Even if they don't make it throughout the entire process, at least give them an interview and a shot to showcase what they know. But also when we talk about having a grab bag of experiences, like how my resume looks, you know, we have to understand that college is the time to try to figure out what you want to do. So if someone has varied experiences, they have so much potential to tap into. So making sure you're looking at that when you're picking a candidate, I think really great, really important. We kind of talked about, I would love to see more representation of different types of schools. And I mean, I don't know if that experience is the same at every internship, because certain, you know, schools just have really strong recruiting pipelines with other you know, corporate institutions. So maybe our school just needs to do better of building those pipelines. But I would love to see more just representation in that at companies. And I really feel like that is it in terms of what I'd like to see from companies. Maybe. Yeah.
I love how you talked about just, you know, not every company is like this, because we aren't talking about every company. Obviously, we haven't worked with every company in the world, but it's kind of going back to that girl who mentioned her horoscope and her zodiac sign. It's like the same message that they say when you're doing anything with spiritual energy. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't.
And I want to say that I think that applies more to larger companies when they pull from really top institutions, because they really have stronger pipelines. I think with smaller companies, you usually see a little bit more diversity in terms of who they're open to hiring and from what schools. But at like larger schools, I think there's this perception that the talent from larger schools is like impeccably better than the talent from, you know, smaller institutions, right? And that is just not the case at all. Like, people choose their institutions for different things. Like, I'm sure you, if you did apply to other schools, like you've got into those schools too, you know? So I'm sure you're a more than worthy applicant, right? And could go to these institutions. So give them a chance, right? Because maybe I chose my school based off location. You know, maybe I wanted a little bit more diversity in who was in my classes, right? So there's all just this different types of stuff that molds like why someone chooses the school, and they're still just as great of a talent as someone from UGA or from Georgia Tech or from Vanderbilt. Now, I'm not saying, you know, just hire anyone just because they go to school and you want some diversity. Like, hire them if they fit well within your company culture and you can see them really being someone that makes an impact on your team, whatever that team may be, whether it's marketing, sales, L&D, human resources. But give them a shot, right? Like, I'm sure where you're at now, they love you, girl. And that's great, but that's what I have for them. Yeah.
And I think something, if I can add on to what you're saying, is the addition of utilizing your resources that you had beforehand. And what I mean by that is loop in old interns, loop in for when you're looking for recruiting. And this is something that I really have not seen. And it's a super unique, I think, idea and concept of just utilizing the interns that you had before, like just internship panels. So when they become alumni, you know, ask them if they want to do speaking events, but also have them be utilized as a resource. And that way you are still tapping into talent that you may not necessarily have underneath your belt anymore, but you can have that consistent connected network that is completely different in how you can access talent, because then you have more awareness, you have more affinity for what you're doing. It just kind of opens up this new lane.
That is such like a great point, because really what really kind of changed the whole trajectory was during conferences, I got to talk to an intern that I knew that was really enjoying her experience at the company that I was able to work for.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like prime marketing right there.
Yeah.
So you are so right in terms of tapping into the intern talent that you have, because that really gets other people to want to come back to you with a personal connection to this company, because this person, it's not just me watching some YouTube video, right?
Yeah.
Someone saying how great it was. It's me actually talking to someone that I know would be honest with me about whatever their experience was, telling me that it's great.
Yeah.
And that is like prime marketing. I joke with her all the time. I'm like, they need to pay you like $200,000 for how you recruited us.
No, for real.
Because that was amazing. Like how she just was able to explain her experience to us.
Yeah, and I think this is free game. So, they don't have to pay consultants and stuff for this. Right. But like you were saying, it just opens up a whole new avenue of networking that you have available to you. And I'm not just talking about previous interns who used to work there. Of course, loop in interns who were full-time. It's just, to a point, maybe like 3-4 years down the line when they're still working at that company, they might not have that same connect as they did maybe within the first 2 years of them working.
Right.
And like, that's the thing about, you have all these revolutionary interns and you have all of these consistently moving parts. You'll never have or not have that connection. Those connections can either evolve or those connections can maybe disconnect, but that doesn't mean that your pocket is completely closed.
Right.
Of those interns that you've worked with, or those old ones. And you can still reference them for things later on, whether it's panels, speaking events, stuff like that. Yeah. But also, if you have interns right now and you want to kind of consistently keep up this recruiting work, check in with them more. Like, just straight cut dry. Yes. Check in with them more and not just leave it up to the responsibility of the manager, because if this seems like it's going to be an overarching thing of, especially within recruiting or HR or whatever your goals are going to be, whether it's fresh perspectives, new innovation, new ideas, and that comes from new people, new things, XYZ, you'll never get far if you just keep instituting the same people and doing the same big initiatives instead of utilizing that voice in the room. Like, I have gotten the opportunity to work with some great leaders, some great executives, some great presidents of companies, and hearing them speak, but also their humility and how they really want to improve really builds an audience, and having those people come down. But if you have those interns and you're checking in with them consistently and you're taking notes, whether it's manager, supervisor, just involvement of the entire company versus just one separate sub portion, you can do so much with that work, because then you have this carried feedback from this early career talent that's only been at your company for this long and they already noticed this much. You'll be surprised how much stuff we ingest and that we know, and that you can move that looped up within your company to wherever it needs to get to go.
And when you talk about like company feedback, as an intern, it can be really hard to be new to a company and feel like it's okay for you to just rip into the company, because it's like, man, I'm just here. Maybe you're in a position where you want a job offer, so you're not going to be as comfortable with ripping into them and like saying everything that you feel is a problem. So I feel like when it comes to hiring managers or supervisors, to talk with the interns about this, to really try to feel like you're cultivating a really safe space for them to say their concerns and feel like they're still gonna have a job at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Because just because you can critique a company doesn't mean you don't like it. It's just there are certain things that you probably feel can be improved. Yeah. But as an intern, you really need, and this is just for me personally, really need that safe space to feel like I can say that without being penalized for it,
Yeah. So, and even in that rephrase, I'm gonna rephrase what you said of like ripping into them. In this case, or give like a caveat more of ripping into them. That doesn't mean it's always bad. Right. I can rip into you in a good way. It don't sound like it by the way it's being phrased, obviously, but just in giving the freedom for that expression. And on that note, just like having interns also create resource documents. You know what I mean? So have them create things. If you hear them saying things like, oh, this would be nice, this would be cool.
Yes.
And not necessarily thinking that it's going to have to take you a lot of money to develop that company resource, but hey, allow them that space to, okay, I will accept your challenge.
Yeah.
Give me like a little process map of what you're doing, and I want to evaluate it and see what it is. So you can truly see what the idea is before you're spending any money on it, spending really any time on it. And that way you can also develop that innovation without exclusively just taking it from an opportunity for an intern to showcase their shine in what they can do, but also how that can benefit your program later on. I think there's just so many like mutual benefits that just aren't utilized or recognized between interns and companies, whether that's grad interns, rotationalships, assistantships, however it goes. Can't speak to, a lot of them, but for the traditional internships and things or experiences, it can have that disconnect. And that's a great way to build that connection, if anything.
Yes, totally agree.
So I really, want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing all of your wisdom and your knowledge, but also your projects with us and your experiences.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I know I was talking to you earlier about like wanting to come on your podcast, and when you first came out with it, like thinking it was an amazing idea, but like I want to be on here when I have something that I feel like I can truly add to the conversation. I was saying I felt like I was downplaying myself a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you reached out to me, it was like, Davianna, like, girl, I haven't had an episode about this yet. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm gonna go and like try it out. But I really do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about my experience, because I think I would love for more people with untraditional backgrounds to, you know, see themselves in corporate, just like us.
And briefly speaking on that, don't downplay your experiences, y'all. Like we were literally talking about this entire
me.
But we were talking about this entire episode of and how she's building that confidence and how she has it now, and marketing yourselves and understanding the questions and the why behind the thoughts and the questions that companies are asking and stuff like that from intern perspectives. Let that be even more reason why you should not downplay. If there's one thing that you have, and I learned this at another internship, credibility. So in building yourself as an intern, you're not going to have a lot of credibility with the company, but that's where you showcase your credibility everywhere else. Of, hey, I have this experience in XYZ. If you're doing something specifically with Gen Z, your credibility is when you were born. Like that's literally like flexing what you can, because you have a lot more experience and credibility than you think. And it's all about how you present it and how you present yourself that will get you where you need to be.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much again. I appreciate you so
welcome.
much.
Thank you for having me. Like, this is really great.
Snaps all around. Thank you for tuning in to another episode, but a new segment of the Intentional Intern Podcast. Tune in next time for another episode of a Students Declassified Market Supporting Guide. Let us know what you think about this new segment, as well as what or who you would want to hear from next. Have a good one.